Good morning, Bible brethren. Today is Tuesday, June 23rd. We were looking at Matthew chapter 23. 23 is all Jesus teaching and wagging his finger at what Matthew describes as scribes and Pharisees. Jesus is identifying people who in the culture exclude others and put gold above God and love, and he is saying woe to you and calling them hypocrites and being very concerned that they're leading others astray. So I would say these are authority figures who are leading others astray, telling them to do this, but actually themselves not giving a good example of that. So that's where the hypocrite comes from. So this idea that it's only, I think Matthew himself or the writers of Matthew have an axe to grind with scribes and Pharisees apparently, but I don't think Jesus does necessarily. I think he's really talking about people who have been taking the power that they've had and been corrupt with it. So that's where we get to, and the part I want to highlight this today that affected me this morning was in verse 29. He says, "Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! You build the tombs of the prophets and decorate the graves of the righteous. And you say, if we had lived in the days of our ancestors, we would not have taken part with them in shedding the blood of the prophets." In other ways, judging back and judging the past and saying, we wouldn't have killed the prophets. They did, but we wouldn't have been that way towards the prophets. And the reality is that Jesus comes back and says to them, yeah, the reality is you impact violence upon violence. Like, you will continue this violence. God will send you prophets now, and you will flog them in your synagogues, and you will take. So he's saying that these authority figures, they are still going to do this violence upon violence. And it made me think about violence in our culture, about this summer and the killing of George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, even the assassination of figures in the civil rights movement in the past. And these are killings. These are not necessarily a police killing. It's just Ahmaud Arbery was killed by his people that live in a neighborhood, I guess, where he was jogging. And so we can just point our fingers at who pulled the trigger. But it made me, when I was reading this today, it made me think of a scene in West Side Story at the very end where Chino shoots Tony, and Maria has the soliloquy, the little speech that she makes at the end. How many more bullets? Enough for you and you and you. And she just wrecked with grief over the loss of her brother and her love, Tony. She pulls the gun, the symbol of violence, the killer, on the whole group, both sides that are gathered there. And in her speech, she accuses them all of killing Bernardo and Riff and Tony. You all killed them. Not with guns, but with hate. And the idea that struck me in this criticism that Jesus is having is that when you perpetrate hatred from one group to another, you do contribute to the violence and the death. And I think that that's what Jesus is trying to say to them here. You know, you'd say you wouldn't kill the prophets, but you still are. And you will, again. So even though Chino was the one that pulled the trigger in West Side Story, you all killed them with hate, is the quote. And it made me think of that when I read about that chapter, that verse 29, and all that bloodshed and violence. And there's a lot of bloodshed in Matthew. The very last bit of that chapter is this love for Jerusalem. Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the city that kills the prophets and stones those who sent to you. How often have I desired to gather your children together as a hen gathers her brood. I really think that's a loving image when you see just, it's like God looking at a child that's been disobedient and like, I love you so much. I'm sorry you've done all these bad things. I still long to have you in my bosom. And I really feel like that's grace. That's how I read that. So hopefully you will too. Have a blessed day.